Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This is Jonathan Kay. I'm the founder of Apptopia, and I'm here with Nguyen, who leads up all of kind of SMB publishing for Facebook. We're pretty pumped to talk to you guys about advertising and a lot of the data behind it. Um, as we're going along, feel free to send questions in the chat, and we'll have plenty of time at the end, and we'll definitely dive into all those with you guys. So without further ado, let's do this thing. Obviously, important things first. My name is Jonathan. Again, thanks for all your time. Very much appreciate it. But I do want to kind of pass things over to Yen for a moment, just to give you some quick background about the Audience Network.
Hey everyone, this is Tuyen from the Audience Network. Thank you for joining us today. As we start in this presentation, what Jonathan and I will cover today, or mostly Jonathan rather, will be about advertising trends and how those trends are propagating some of the top apps that we see in the charts today. One of the ways that Audience Network works with app developers is we help app developers not only advertise but also monetize your apps. So by having access to Facebook Audience Network, you have access to our advertisers worldwide, and you have access to high quality targeted ads. One of the things that differentiate us from other networks is we do people-based targeting, which means that we are able to discern users, their interests, and give them the ads that are best suited to what they like on a daily basis. And we base our ad network off of ad quality, which means we place a very high value on high quality, innovative formats. So today we will not be going through any of the ad creatives, but that will be something that we will be going through our next session with Apptopia. Thank you so much for joining.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tuyen. We're not going to talk too much about Apptopia, so don't worry. What I did just want to let everyone know is some of the data points that Apptopia provides competitive intelligence on. This is really important because a lot of the data in the slides that we're going to talk about now are essentially backed by this data. So as you're seeing what we're talking about over the next 20 minutes, this is kind of the data powering a lot of these observations. So why are we here? Why are you spending your time? If you're on the West Coast, why aren't you eating lunch yet? Essentially because we're going to talk you through some advertising trends. We're going to talk you through different ways you can identify opportunities. And we're going to try and figure out what it is we can learn by those people spending the most and making the most. So let's dive in and talk about some of the trends that we're seeing. First thing that we're looking at here is we're looking at essentially advertising impression growth over the last 6+ months. And on the left, you can see games. On the right, you can see non-games. I would imagine it's not hugely surprising to anyone here in the audience that the number of ad impressions is growing. I will say that I was surprised to see the rate at which it was growing, especially, I kind of almost anticipated that after Q4 to see a decline, but it's continuing to increase, which is either as a result of it working or more people entering the space. And so we wanted to start with this kind of benchmark because what we're going to show you here is categories that are now growing at a faster rate than the benchmark. And so in that purple dotted line, you're going to see the benchmarks that we showed you here. But you can see the categories that are growing faster. And so in games, it's not hugely surprising to see card games and adventure games and strategy games growing pretty fast. I think in non-games, it's probably not crazy to see shopping and dating, just given how well those are monetizing on mobile today. I think probably the most interesting observation on this slide is food and drink. And we happen to do a lot of work with restaurants and a lot of the quick serve restaurants. And we've seen that these free hamburger for your download promotions are working really, really, really well. And so I think a lot of this kind of spike in food and drinks is relating to brick and mortar companies figuring out how to make really good mobile promotions that work. Now, if we look at the flip side of that, again, the dotted line represents the benchmark that we showed you. But in this case, what we're showing you is we're showing you categories that are either declining or actually growing at a slower rate than the benchmark. So for games, you can see that racing and trivia are actually still growing in terms of ad impression volume. They're just not growing as fast as their counterparts. On the non-game side, it's actually really interesting. You can see finance is pretty flat, but tools and utilities is the one that jumps out at me because it's declining pretty rapidly. And I would attribute this primarily to two things. The first thing is that as new operating systems continue to be released, we see that more and more tools are being natively built into the operating system, hence like creating duplicate functionality for certain apps. We're also seeing stores like Apple, especially with their recent release, start to ban certain apps like VPN apps that might be collecting data that people aren't comfortable with. And as a result, I think you're seeing those players start to scale back a little bit their ad spend. So as we're looking at trends, one thing that I wanted to do before we move on was not only look at trends in terms of overall impression volume, but also look at trends in terms of the number of unique apps advertising. So like the supply side of the market. And so you can see that the number of unique apps is growing pretty consistently as well over the last 12 months. But let's look at it on a category by category basis. So you can see that action, adventure, arcade, these are growing. So like the actual number of apps advertising is growing quite a bit. And if you look on the right, you'll see that casino and role playing are declining. Now, I just want to be really clear. Don't assume that declining means that there's less money being spent. Remember, we're talking about unique number of apps advertising. So this could actually be more money, but just coming from a smaller number of more concentrated advertisers. So this is really important for you guys to look at because you need to understand how much competition there is there. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the opportunity analysis, but it's always important to understand who's spending money in your category and how you benchmark against them. So having said that, let's talk a little bit about opportunity analysis. So as a data company and data geeks, we think about this all the time. And so what does it mean, opportunity? For us, we think about opportunity in terms of markets, so countries and categories. We're typically looking for markets that have high demand and low supply. What does that actually mean? It means that there's a lot of users taking lots of action, spending lots of money, spending a lot of time, but a small number of people advertising to them, meaning that there's opportunity for new incumbents to come in and kind of present a new, fresh perspective. The second thing that we look for is we look for markets that are flat or competitive. And so let's just talk about what the extreme of that is. The extreme would be social networking. There might be 5 social networking apps that really matter. So are you going to go launch like a new social networking app and try and compete with Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter? Probably not, right? And so you're looking for markets that have huge mid-markets where the barrier to entry is like reasonable. So what opportunities exist? So in games, you can see that we've identified sports games and role-playing as the 2 biggest opportunities today. And what we've done here is we've taken the number of users in these categories and the amount of in-app purchase revenue, and we've actually divided it by the unique number of advertisers. This is really interesting because it helps you understand, A, how much volume there is there, but how much volume relative to the number of advertisers, i.e., in this case, the amount of people you have to compete with for attention, right? And so having over 1 million MAUs and nearly $1 million in quarterly in-app purchase revenue per advertiser is really, really interesting. And then what you'll see is that both of these categories are in the bottom 25% in terms of impressions per advertiser, which means that there's not 1 or 2 advertisers coming in and dominating the entire space. So it means that they're a little bit flatter markets with a like good mid market. Non-games, I honestly think the non-games opportunities are more exciting than the games opportunities. I think you'll see that the in-app purchase revenue opportunity is smaller, but if you just look at the number of users here, I mean, they're significantly larger, right? You have 2 million and 6 million monthly active users per advertiser, which essentially means that you have a lot of users who are engaging with these apps, but not a ton of advertisers. And so it represents a good opportunity for someone to kind of come in and maybe shake things up a little bit. So these are definitely things I would keep an eye out for if I was you, or especially if you have an app in these category. So let's look at top grossers and top advertisers. And just so everyone knows what we're talking about, where essentially when we talk about top grossers throughout the presentation, we're essentially looking at the top 100 apps that are making the most in-app purchase revenue. When we're looking at top advertisers, we're looking at the people who have the most number of paid impressions. And we're typically, again, looking at the top 100 advertisers that have the most impressions. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand trends that exist between these two audiences. So the first thing that jumps out to me is that over 70% of top grossing apps are advertising today. So just like take a moment to let that set in. It means that the vast majority of apps that are making the most money are spending money on advertising. And so truthfully, maybe this isn't like an earth-shattering piece of information for you, because we all kind of know at this point that you have to spend money to make money. And I think as the industry and as the app ecosystem progresses, this slide is becoming more and more the case, which is if you can invest in your app, it's going to be hard to have a successful app. I think one of the things that makes me so damn excited for this presentation is this metric right here, which says that 19% of top grossing games are also top advertisers, and even 13% for non-games. So what does it mean? It means that the people who are making the most money, they're all advertising, but they're not necessarily spending the most money on advertising, which means that while you do have to spend money to make money, you don't have to spend an absorbent amount of money to make money. You just have to spend that money in a clever, effective way. And so it kind of means that there's a real mid-market, and lots of people outside of those just top couple of publishers or those top spenders are able to make money from advertising. So who's spending the money and why are they doing it, right? I think this is kind of the key question. So the first group of apps that's spending a lot of money is new apps. So I mean, I knew apps were big advertisers, but I was surprised to see that over 22% of top advertisers are new apps, or apps that have been released in the last 3 months, which means that like advertising is a key strategy when you're launching. And I want to show you guys a couple interesting examples. So the first one we're looking at is Jetpack Jump, which is, I think, made by our friends Quali. And what you're looking at here is you're looking at a dual axis graph, which shows you downloads graphed against advertising activity. And I want to just quickly take a moment to explain what advertising activity is so that everyone can understand what this kind of like strange percentage is on the right of the graph. Essentially, Apptopia sees about 15 million ad impressions per ad network per day. And what we're doing is we're dividing the number of impressions we see overall by the impressions for that specific advertiser. And so you should think about this blue line here as kind of a share of voice that this specific advertiser has across different networks. And so it's pretty much like an advertising index. And what's really nice about this is it allows you to see how closely tied their downloads are to advertising. And so if you look in around the first or second week of June, something really, really exciting happens, which is that clearly advertising was a pretty big part of their initial launch strategy. But somewhere around here in the middle of June, you'll see that they're actually decreasing their ad spend, but the number of new downloads continues to go up. This is kind of that like quintessential point where they've advertised enough that they're actually starting to get a nice organic lift from that ad spend. So this is a really successful example. Now I want to show you another example on non-games. While you can see that it's a slightly smaller number in terms of downloads, we're still talking about tens of thousands of downloads a day. And the organic lift here is even more even more prominent because you can see that they were starting to spend a little bit upon launch, a little bit upon launch. They got some traction. They did a pretty strong kind of campaign here for 2 or 3 weeks, and that definitely helped increase their number of new users. But they were able to decrease their ad spend to a reasonable kind of more drip amount, but their number of downloads continued to skyrocket, which is really exciting because it means that their advertising was effective at raising awareness. And while they couldn't shut it off completely, they were able to like dramatically increase the split between organic and paid installs. So I think those examples are really, really exciting, honestly. One thing that I wanted to talk about is that, like, it's not just new apps that are advertising, it's the old guys too, right? It's the tried and true players. And so if you look at Candy Crush, we kind of label this as maintenance mode, but even Candy Crush is consistently spending lots of money on advertising because maybe they're not growing like they used to be, but they're trying to maintain that user base and maintain the nucleus of users and their brand awareness. And in this case, they're spending a lot of money across a bunch of different ad networks in order to maintain that kind of level that they've been at for so many years. So there's lots of different strategies around advertising for people who might be in different places in their ad life cycle. I honestly think this is probably the most surprising thing for me, which is that there's a very large amount of top advertisers that are essentially monetizing via ads. So I think there's a very common misconception in the space today that advertising is expensive and you need to be monetizing via in-app purchases if you want to be able to turn an ROI from your ad campaigns. And the truth is that it's really not true. You can see here that over 25% of top advertisers are effectively monetizing their app via ads. And what's even more exciting is that over 33% of their overall store revenue is coming from ads. So it's not like just these apps are just making like a couple $1,000s a month. They're making a pretty significant amount of their revenue from advertising. And on the right here, you can see some examples, as well as you can see a handful of different categories that tend to be like the more popular or the categories that tend to be most effective in terms of ad monetization. As we dug deeper into the data, we realized that ultimately I shouldn't have been surprised because if you look over the last 18 months, you'll see that the number of unique apps monetizing via advertising almost doubled. So it grew 83% since the beginning or middle of 2017. And so there's clearly like more and more opportunity to make money in advertising, which is exciting. And I wanted to just drive that home a little further because if you look at these three apps, which are three very, very popular apps today with very substantial like six-figure revenue streams, you can see that ad revenue doesn't just represent a small percentage of their revenue. It represents in a lot of cases half or more of their revenue streams. And again, these guys are spending a lot of money on advertising too. So I wanted to get back and kind of show you some of these graphs as well, because it seems that not only is advertising effective for bringing on new users, but it's effective for maintaining that user base. And so if you look here, what you can see is you can see how ad revenue and ad spend correlate. And again, it's really, really exciting to see that a very moderate amount of ad spend that is actually decreasing allows you to create a very like up and to the right line in terms of ad revenue here. And I wanted to show you another example, which is a little bit of bigger numbers. So you can see that this is an app that's making essentially over $10,000 a day on ad revenue. And while they are advertising quite a bit more than the previous example, what's exciting is that how closely correlated their advertising is with their ad revenue. And you can see that it's very sustainable, right? So I don't know, it's just a really optimistic example showing how you can play both sides of the ad network to build a pretty healthy, profitable business. So as we were kind of thinking about this whole presentation, there was really one thing that jumped out at me the most, which is that advertising is, more than anything, it's the key to longevity. So you need to spend money in order to make money. But the truth is that you need to spend money to stay relevant, right? We're in a world where there's so much shiny things jumping at you that if you want to stay relevant for a long period of time, advertising is the kind of arrow in your quiver that you need in order to do that. And what's really exciting is that we essentially looked at every app in the grossing charts over the last 365 days. And we found that there was just over 60 apps that maintained a top grossing spot every single day of the year. No breaks, no weird examples, no weekends, literally every single day. And 100% of those were spending money on advertising. And again, it's because if you want to stay relevant for a long period of time, like no matter who you are, no matter how big your brand is, you need to be staying in front of people. I think it's also important that we talk about who's not advertising, just because the truth is that not every single app whose top grossing is advertising. And the truth is that about 30% of apps that are top grossers are not advertising. And so we tried to look into a bit why this was, and we found that almost all of the examples were apps like Skype or Dropbox, where mobile was not a user acquisition channel for them. It was more a vehicle to maintain engagement with those users. And so a lot of these guys didn't even have sign-up forms on their mobile. And so if they're not actually acquiring users via mobile, it probably doesn't make sense to spend money on mobile advertising. So one thing that I wanted to show you here is two different ad creatives. And on the left, you see an app that is monetizing via advertising. And on the right, you see an app that's monetizing via in-app purchases. And I wanted to draw your attention to the difference in ads that they need to create in order to correlate with their monetization strategy. On the left, you have a very simple 15-second ad. They're doing one repetitive activity over and over again. On the right, you see an extremely graphic ad, right? It's 30 seconds. They showcased 4 or 5 completely different dimensions of gameplay. And so as we talk about different ways that you can make money with advertising, I think it's very important to just keep in mind that like different monetization come with different responsibilities and needs in terms of how much money you need to invest into advertising. And these two creatives felt like a really strong example of that for me. And it leads really nicely into what Tuyen had mentioned when she kind of kicked things off, which is that Apptopia and Facebook Audience Network, we believe that ad creatives are so much the key to something that can push you over the edge of being successful or not, that we wanted to do an entire webinar just dedicated to ad creatives. And if you see here on the right, this is kind of our teaser case study that we're going to help you avoid in our next webinar, which is that you spend a good amount of money, you get a bunch of downloads, but you're not actually able to convert those newly acquired users into revenue because maybe you misled them or maybe the ad creative wasn't clear enough. And so next month we're going to talk all about different ad creatives and how to benchmark yourself and how to make sure that if you're spending money on advertising, you're getting the most out of it. So I just wanted to take a minute to say thank you for the time. I know it was packed with a lot of data, but you will get a copy of the presentation. And we're really more than happy to answer any questions that anyone has right now or after the presentation as well. So I think we'll kind of proceed to the Q&A section. So one question that just came up is, what trend do you see in ad spend amongst categories like retail and shopping, both click and mortal and purely online apps? Yeah, so it's a good question. I think the biggest trend that we see is that A, it's going up dramatically. B, we see that shopping apps actually have the largest unique number of ad creatives because they don't actually know, they don't have like one shopping message to advertise. They're constantly advertising. Each advertisement represents a product. And so I think the shopping apps that we see being really successful are actually launching an obscene amount of different creatives focused on different products to make sure that they get someone's attention. Tu Yen, I'm curious from your end, is there any trends in shopping that you guys are seeing?
Hey, Jonathan, very much the same. So, what we are seeing is across the board on all verticals, creative is the real driver and real optimization for getting users in at different parts of the funnel. And particularly with shopping, retargeting is a huge, huge spend bucket. So, if you think about people coming to your app or coming to your website, looking at specific things, and having that exact product category follow you through Facebook, through Instagram, etc., and then also showing you products like it, that tends to be a very high converting ad for a lot of our shoppers or shopping vertical advertisers.
Yeah, it's a good question though. Are
Perfect.
there
I'll take the next question from Vadim. So Vadim, your question is on Facebook ads campaign and Facebook analytics. Unfortunately, I work on the Facebook audience network publishing side, and so I do not have expertise on these two things. What I will do is answer you directly, grab your email address, and try to follow up with you when I can get you the right answer. If anybody else has questions, feel free to use the question box in the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel to ask any questions. Jonathan, do you want to take the next one from Jonathan?
Yep. You have shown that casino category was declining. Can you point to what could be the reason? Yeah, it's a very interesting question. So I have to actually, let's just go back to the slide. Let's look at exactly what you're referencing here. So what we're showing here is that the number of unique apps advertising is declining, not that the category on a whole is declining. And so we'd have to look deeper into it. But Jonathan, my instinct is that essentially there might be a handful of top advertisers in casino that are dominating the spend. So it actually could be increasing in terms of dollars spent, but decreasing in terms of unique number of apps. I mean, I would be sad to say this, but it might be because it's becoming a slightly less competitive category, where there's a smaller number of apps that are kind of owning the majority of the share. Okay. Next question is from Don. You talked about apps that are spending at launch to get things going and then lower the app spend to maintain the velocity. What KPI or metrics do you see if we need to continue to spend or go into maintenance mode? That is a awesome question. Tuyen, do you want to maybe take that first and then I can share some thoughts after?
Hey, Don, this is a really great question. And for me, working on the publisher side, I don't have the exact KPIs or metrics that you might want to look at specifically for advertising, but I do know that a conversation that we have with developers who both advertise and monetize on Facebook is really looking at the return on ad spend. So one of the common mistakes that a lot of developers make is they say, hey, it costs me, $1 per install, and so I can't spend more than, X amount of dollars because I only make $5 from in-app purchases. So what we'd like to do is actually take a look at all of your monetization streams. So with the installs, with the users that you are getting, and for the engagement on your app, how much money are you making from advertising, combined with how much money you're making from in-app purchases, combined with any additional monetization sources that you have. And you should be taking that number as the number to calculate when it comes to return on ad spend. So what I can also do is take your email address offline and follow up with you on more specifics when I get the KPIs and metrics from the ad spend from my counterparts here at Facebook.
Awesome. And I just wanted to add something to that. So, Don, our whole job is about reverse engineering the App Store algorithms. And so I would say one of the most important KPIs, and by the way, like you should take Facebook's word for this, but my 2 cents is that one of the most important KPIs is going to be retention. And the reason is because if you think about how the rank store algorithms are built, they're essentially taking a combination of new users, existing users, and velocity. And so if the new users you're acquiring through advertising are staying in your app and actually engaging in your app, then you're likely to get more like quote unquote rank points from that engagement, which will boost your rank without ad spend, right? Because you're getting a boost from engagement of existing users. And then the higher you get in the charts, the more organic visibility you're going to get. So I think I would probably take a look at your own app's engagement KPIs and see if you're able to retain users that you get from advertising at the same rate that you were getting before. And if that engagement continues to rise, I think the organic lift will come along with it. Anything else? That was an awesome question. I
Yeah,
enjoyed.
oh, sorry to interrupt you, John. We also have a question from Rohit. How is Audience Network able to do people-based targeting? Does that mean Audience Network can track the FB identity of the end users? So for Audience Network, we only serve ads to Facebook users. So that means that the person has to have the Facebook app downloaded on their phone, or they have to be logged in through a browser for Facebook. And into their Facebook account. So we do not at this time target ads to anybody that is not a Facebook user. And so that allows us to provide highly targeted ads based on what we do know about this particular user. All right, John, do you want to take this next one from Rebecca Nielsen?
Sure. Do you find playable ads are worth the effort to create in terms of ROAS? Whew, that is a good question too. So in general, I'm going to go with, so okay, so I guess I should disclaim this by saying I don't have data on the answer to this question right in front of me. And so I am usually sharing opinions very data backed. In this moment, this is going to be intuition backed. But I do believe that the ROI on playable ads is pretty high. And the reason is because, and we're going to talk a ton about this in the next webinar, but one of the things that is data backed is that when you're building an ad creative, the more real insight you give into what the gameplay or the app mechanics are like, the more likely those users are to retain. So I'll just give you a really extreme example. Imagine that you saw an ad with a whole bunch of actors, okay? So I don't remember what it was. I think it was Priceline, okay? So Priceline did an ad where they had all these actors where they were negotiating in a room, and it was all about their whole Priceline negotiator thing. It was funny, it was cute, it was entertaining, but it actually converted much worse than the ad where they just showed what actually happened inside the app. And so while I wouldn't necessarily suggest maybe an entire strategy of playable ads, I definitely would advocate for weaving them in, because the more transparent you are with your user prior to them quote unquote buying or downloading your app, the more likely they are to retain. And then going back to the question before, the more of them that retain, the more of that extra lift that you're going to get from that.
I can also add to that as well, especially, Rebecca, it sounds like you are a game developer. Especially with game developers, we find that video formats are the most highly engaged formats. So if you think about the rewarded video format, that's our highest growing format over the past couple years. And it's because developers find that, users understand that when they are playing a game, they're getting it for free, that there is a cost associated with it, and it's a cost that they are willing to play. And when it is a really well done format and a really well done video or playable ad, it is essentially another channel of entertainment for this particular user. So for playable ads, I don't have the specific ROAS, but I do know that this is something that our most sophisticated game developers are adopting and have been early adopters on.
The only other thing I'll add about playables, Rebecca, is that I think they will get less expensive to create as they become more popular. So that will only further influence the ROI. Tuyen, I'm not sure if you see Rob's question about hyper-local advertisers. That seems like that might be a good one for Facebook.
Perfect. So, Rob, your question is, are there any examples of local high-value advertisers using this network to retarget? So, Rob, again, I do not work on the advertising side of the house, so I can give you anecdotally what I do see. I do know that Facebook, even my dad, who owns a local barber shop, uses Facebook to target our town that we live in. And so that is one of the best use cases for Facebook, is targeting a locale, an area. And in fact, one of the campaign settings that you have when you are setting up a campaign with Facebook is you can choose X miles from a particular address. So, 10 miles from your address, a county, a particular city. So all that is available. When it comes to retargeting, what happens with retargeting is, because retargeting is in the lower funnel of the advertising cycle, there are multiple campaigns that you would want to run. So one is a catch-all, which is, hey, anybody in this area, you might be interested in solar because here are the benefits. When you get interactions with those ads and people who are visiting your website or viewing your videos or whatever collateral it is that you have out there on the internet, you would want to be able to collect that information, so then you could create a retargeting or a lookalike audience list to say, all right, for these people, they've already seen my hook. Now I really need to sync them. So what is that next iteration of that advertising message that I need to show them? So it's not going to be learn about solar and the benefits. It's going to be about, hey, with my particular company, here's what we can provide you, and here's why you want to work with us. Or, hey, for this month, we have a particular discount. Or, hey, the federal funding credit, tax credit is about to run out for 2019. So if you're looking to getting solar, don't wait until 2020 to do it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add is that we're big advocates that there are usually benchmark or examples outside of your own industry that you can learn from. And as it pertains to local, we've seen some really clever things that these new food delivery companies internationally are doing, and how they've actually customized their ads for the local markets that they're being shown in. So if you were looking for just a benchmark of someone that has a lot of content, that might be a really good one to use. Cool. So, oh, okay. Any other questions? Tuyen, do you see anything else?
Let's see. I think I do see one more question here. It says, besides hyper casual games, are there any other groups of apps making decent money from publishing advertisements? Yes, definitively yes. And Jonathan, you should add to this as well. But as you know, I work with the North America publishers for Audience Network, and I can say that we have publishers making money from apps across all verticals: news, lifestyle, entertainment, it really, food, it really spans. Fitness is a really huge category for us as well, and it really spans across the spectrum. I think the key about making money from placing advertisements in your app is two main things. Well, actually, it's three things. It's first, do you have enough users who are using your apps? Are they engaged? throughout the day, throughout the month, throughout the week, where they're coming back to your app. Because when you make money from your app, it is the number of impressions that you show, and number of impressions has to do with the number of users and how long they spend on your app. The third, and probably, equally as critical as the number of users and how engaged you are, is the type of ad implementation you have. So if you have a very beautiful app and place an ad just haphazardly on the app, your users are not going to like that very much. But if you have an app with a thoughtful ad put in natural resting places and natural pauses within the app, that provides the user the ability to actually interact with your app, pause on the ad, decide if they want to engage with it or not, and then move forward.
Yeah, so I love that question, and I agree with everything that Tien just said. All I'll add is that we're definitely seeing a shift outside of casual gaming. I think we did, or we're working on a report right now that shows that actually like racing games, as an example, is starting to make up a very large percentage of ad revenue, which definitely is going to fall outside of hyper casual. I think the general value prop is that there needs to be a quid pro quo between you and your user, which is that they don't mind seeing an ad as long as they feel like it's a fair trade. And so we see lots of good examples where like maybe instead of actually creating friction for someone to buy something, they watch an ad and then they get some little barrier of entry removed. Because in that sense, time is money. I think the other thing is that honestly, the last 5 apps that I downloaded, I downloaded through ads. And the reason is because they were super targeted. And so I think as consumers, if you're doing ads that are, as Tuyen said, they're well placed, so they're not interrupting, but they're like adding value to your experience, and they're actually relevant for you, it's really, really great because like it's almost like a discovery engine, right? And how much money have major organizations spent trying to build a discovery engine? In a lot of way, like ads can be a really, really good discovery engine as long as they're targeted. And obviously, this is what companies like Facebook are spending lots of money to make sure that that's done right. So
I'll take the question from Rohit. So Rohit, your question is, how does Audience Network perform versus other Facebook properties like Instagram or Facebook feed? So when you are an advertiser with Facebook, what you can do is set a campaign budget, set your ad creatives, and you can do a few things. You can say, let Facebook optimize where to show my ads. We find that this is the best way for most advertisers to go, because what essentially happens is Facebook says, hey, these users are more likely to interact with your ad. And these users may be on Instagram, sometimes they may be found through the Audience Network, sometimes they may be found through Facebook feed. So as an advertiser, you may not have the ability to discern or to know where users you want to reach are going to be at a certain time, but Facebook has that ability. So by using by opting in to showing your ads on all Facebook properties, and by allowing Facebook to optimize that for you, you will begin to learn over time what channels work best and to be able to double down on those channels. Perfect. If anybody has any last minute question, please go ahead and type that into the box, but it looks like we're slowing down here. This engagement has been absolutely incredible, and we would like to thank you again for joining us. Just for everybody here, as a reminder, we will be sending out a recorded version of this live webinar, so you'll be able to refer back to this and you'll be able to share this with your colleagues or anybody that is relevant. In addition, we will be sending you out a survey after the webinar, and it will appear on the screen. If you could please give us feedback on your experience, what we can do better, and what you would like to hear from us next time, please do fill out this survey. We try to cater our next subjects to what our participants want. Thank you so much for joining.